You are now getting ready for bed. Donned in your sleep clothes, you are all comfy with your head nestled on a pillow. You are eager to have a good night's sleep. You may now turn off the light and let us begin our bedtime story. This is a fictional narrative, though based mostly from a historical account. The title of tonight's reading is Ultimate Showdown. A lone figure of a man with a long beard, treading the wastelands of cracked and hardened earth, was the sight that met Obadiah when he approached a field south of Shechem in search of some green pasture for the king's herd of horses and mules who were in dire need of food. The drought that had plagued the land of Israel had not abated yet, and scarcity was the only thing prevalent at the moment. Obadiah recognized the wanderer as they neared each other. "Is it really you, Master Elijah? The king had been searching for you up to kingdoms far and wide." He bowed to the ground, for Elijah was the most renowned among God's servants. "Yes, it is I," Elijah answered. "And you, Obadiah, the king's administrator, how are things at the palace? For I was ordered by the Lord of hosts to confront the king again for his many wrongdoings." Obadiah shook with fear. "You must not come to him, for he is after you. He will most surely have your head. O Master Elijah, Queen Jezebel had many of the Lord's prophets killed, though secretly I have kept 100 of them in 2 different caves. So you see, if I tell him you are here, and if you fail to appear before His Majesty the King, I will certainly perish too." Then Elijah answered most solemnly, "I shall surely appear before King Ahab. Do not fear, but I do have to see him this day." Obadiah went back to the fortress in Samaria and reluctantly arranged for a meeting between the ruler of the northern kingdom and the prophet of God. King Ahab was a short but muscular man with curly hair that swirled about his golden crown as he sat like a dwarf upon his tall and stately throne. When Elijah entered the royal court, he blurted, "Troubler of Israel, is it really you?" The middle-aged sage retorted, "It is I, Elijah the Tishbite. But I correct your statement, your majesty. I have not brought trouble upon this land, but you and your family are responsible for this calamity. You have time and again disobeyed God and have lived your lives committing many atrocities, and more so, you keep chasing after false gods who lead you all astray. God longs to be gracious, for He is a kind Lord, but your leadership has caused everyone's hearts to harden before their Maker, and have caused them to perform many abominable acts." King Ahab sneered wickedly. His lips raised to one side, while his left eyebrow arched higher than his other one when he did. "You challenge me, old wizard. All you ever do is announce punishment upon me and our people. You just talk too much. You are simply exasperating." Elijah, in defense, answered, "Sacrificing babies in the arms of an idol, with fire emanating from its core. How are your hearts deaf to the children's torturous cries? Also, sexual orgies are everywhere. The land shakes hands with evil continually, and you do nothing about it, and in fact are even an accomplice because of your lust for anything your flesh desires." The prophet's stomach churned in repulse and felt God's heart wrenched by the evil all around. As God's seer, he had been granted the eye to witness that God was pained by everything that was happening, for his only desire were for goodness and love to reign, to bring out a result of lasting joy and peace. Just then, the arrogant Queen Jezebel appeared and sat next to her husband. She was dressed in a fine wine-colored gown, her face masked with heavy cosmetics, and her hair in braids were above her held-high head. "And what is it to you? We are all just enjoying ourselves. Our God is a God of pleasure, but you have a very narrow-minded God. But I have no qualms anymore, for at last you appear, Elijah. You have threatened my prophets, I threatened you too. You will surely die, Her eyes flared like fire, and her lips twitched when she spoke. Elijah answered, "But I pose a challenge for you both. If you claim that Baal is the one true God, then let him rain down fire from heaven. I will also call on Israel's God and ask him to do the same. We will then attest who the real deity is. I think this is reasonable, and if you are certain you are in the right, then there is no cause for worry. Let us all assemble at Mount Carmel. You have 450 prophets of Baal and 400 prophets of Asherah. There is only me left among God's servants, for you have wiped them all out. So if you're confident of your God, you will have no reason not to take up my charge." Elijah spoke out courageously. The royal couple looked at each other before eventually nodding their heads together. Before them stood the palace guards and their attendants. Because of their presence, they did not want to lose face. The two had too much self at stake, that though they wanted to do away with the servant of God right away, they relented for the sake of their reputation. So it was that a great assembly convened at the rocky crag. The barren mountain made the deep blue skies more prominent, while the dry and hot howling wind without a barrier swept through the crowd, causing everyone to feel more agitated and thrilled for the show of a lifetime to commence. Elijah, in his tunic of sheep's fleece and a polished staff in his hand, stood alone against the hundreds upon hundreds in linen uniforms and lavish chanting instruments of the prophets of Sidon's gods. King Ahab sat on his royal carriage, now mounted upon stone legs, with his velvet curtains drawn back for him to have full vantage view of the spot where the duel between gods were to transpire. The people had built 2 circular stone altars from smooth rocks piled high. Already, dry twigs and branches had been gathered in bunches for the sacrifice. Elijah watched the growing number of people who showed up, appearing excited but with that unmistakable, unsatiated gleam in their eyes. "How long will you waver, everyone? Today you will see who is God, and you better choose rightly. If Yahweh is God, then follow him. And if Baal, then follow him. But do make up your minds," the prophet of God addressed the swelling crowd in the bid to command their attention, but not a single soul spoke up in response. "Now bring us 2 bulls, and you choose which bull you will offer to your God," Elijah instructed. "Cut your bull in pieces, as I will mine later, and let us set the meat at our designated shrines. Only let not a fire be ignited to consume it. Call on your God as I will call to mine, and whoever God responds with fire, he is indeed God. Now go on first. I even dare you to pray loudly, fervently, and cry at the top of your lungs." Immediately, loud bangings of cymbals, the beatings of drums, and diverse chants and prayers came up simultaneously, not just from the servants of Baal, but even from the common people gathered. Some danced and reveled, while others cut scores on their skins, while others yet painted themselves with dyes in a great attempt to summon their gods. Elijah mocked their vain display. It was already noontime, and the heat was at its peak. Blackbirds and vultures were stationed nearby, as if ready to pounce on the rotting meat laid on Baal's altar. It was apparent they were all getting exasperated and exhausted. Your God might be on a vacation somewhere, or perhaps asleep and must be awakened. So call out even louder. We have been here all morning, and now it is already high noon, and yet your gods have not inasmuch even said a word." The crowd mustered a second wind, and went wild, chanting more loudly and cutting themselves with lances, till blood gushed out of them. Elijah felt such pity that the people were all set in their ways, in spite of seeing the futility of what they were doing. Soon the skies turned an orange glow, until the sun kissed the earth, darkening it as it went down, while the moon rose above, taking its place in the heavens. Torches were lit all around as the people continued to cry. Everything were in shambles, and even the altar of Yahweh had tumbled, as everyone leapt everywhere, causing havoc wherever their feet found something to step on. Finally, Elijah called everyone to a hush and asked the people to gather near him. The entire day you have all asked for Baal to take heed of you, but he has not answered. Now I shall call upon Yahweh, but before that, let us pile 12 stones according to the 12 tribes of Jacob. After they had done so, he made a trench round about it. He then arranged the pieces of bull's meat on top of the altar, where a blanket of wood had been laid below it. He then asked the people to pour 4 jars of water over the meat and the wood, and to allow it to drain unto the trenches. He asked them to do this 3 times, so that every meat, wood, and stone were soaked in water, and then he finally filled the trenches to the brim. Elijah cried with a voice that reverberated through the entire mountain, "God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, let it be known that you are God indeed, and that I am your servant, and you have called me, and I have done all these according to your word." Then the heavens split open, thunder clapped, and a blast from above sounded, as a torrent of fire descended in a sweep, consuming everything from the meat, the wood, the stones, the water in the trenches, and even the dust residue of the once standing altar. Men, women, and children screamed in fear as they all knelt on the ground. "Yahweh is God," they cried aloud, as they realized the gravity of their sins at the light of His presence. They felt God's might and power, and they mouthed again and again, as if to let everything that they had just witnessed sink in, "Oh, Yahweh is indeed God." The prophets of Baal, that having realized their defeat, scurried every which way to flee. "Quick! Do not let Baal's prophets escape," Elijah called out. With renewed passion, the people ran after them and captured each one. Then they, with the prophet of God, eliminated all the savage servants of Baal in Kishon. Elijah then turned to the king, who had been left paralyzed by the great showdown. King Ahab's eyes still stared blankly at the spot where the altar of Yahweh once stood. "Unbelievable," he mouthed over and over again. "Unbelievable indeed." The prophet shook his head at the sight of Ahab, for the king's defenses were down. He looked beaten as if he had been flogged. "O king, go and have yourself a meal. Eat and drink now, for I hear the sound of the abundance of rain. It shall now rain in Israel." Elijah smiled, turned his head to look up above in triumph. He then left the monarch on his propped-up carriage, after the king had finally been able to recover from his stupor. Elijah then hastened to the summit of Mount Carmel to kneel and pray. Still letting everything that had transpired sink in, he exclaimed, "O Lord, you are great in power and might. You are commendable for your patience toward a people as stiff-necked as our people. Thank you for showing everyone who truly is in charge. That was awesome what you just did." He laughed with abandon for a while, and then he stilled himself. "But I ask you now to rend the heavens and let the rains come down upon this dried-up land." Elijah's servant, who had been quietly behind his master all through the day and even up to the summit that evening, was as greatly impressed by the doings of God through his master. He was feeling an ardent desire to serve Yahweh with every fiber of his being as well. Elijah cut through his servant's reverie when he turned to ask for him to observe if anything has changed beyond the horizon where the sea met the sky. "No sign of anything whatsoever, Master Elijah," the boy reported, as he strained to watch for even the slightest clue of a downpour. 7 times Elijah commanded his servant to check, and each time he said no, until on the 7th return he announced excitedly, "There is a cloud, as small as a fist, that I see in the distance, like a man's hand rising from out of the ocean." Elijah then commanded his helper to tell King Ahab to take his chariot and run, for the rain was already on its way. Soon enough, the stars in the sky and the full moon above were snuffed out by the mist that swelled the heavens, and huge drops came pelting down upon the parched and dried up land. The leader of the northern kingdom then took heed and rode back to Jezreel. The Lord of the universe at that same moment took hold of Elijah and made him arrive in Jezreel ahead of the king. Elijah saw the preeminence of God in everything and acknowledged once again that God indeed has no rival or equal. The Psalms continue to reverberate the phrase, "Be still and know that I am God." We have now reached the end of our story. Good night and sleep tight.